Welcome to Let Me Know How It Is, a pop culture podcast about TV, movies, comics, and all things geek. In today's episode, we talk about comics, ages, and heroes. Thanks for listening. Comics, ages, and heroes. I'll explain in a moment, but first, I'm Zach Slater.
I'm Frank Melman.
This is Tommy Smithereens.
And I'm Clifton.
All right, so for clarity, we're going to go over all the different ages in comics. You've heard this is the golden age of TV, right? Well, comics has ages or eras too. The thing is in comics that they're pretty clearly defined. The golden age is this year to that year, right? Silver age is this year to that year, and et cetera, and stuff like that. So as part of this conversation, we're going to be looking at the eras, but through the heroes that were created during that age. And ultimately, we're each going to select like what era made the most important contributions to comics through the heroes that debuted in that age. Okay, so Frank, I'm going to kick it to you first so that you can explain the ages and kind of give us a breakdown of the years and how they're distinctive from one to another. Sure.
So in looking at the various ages, I found that no one really agrees on what they're supposed to be. So we're going to go with what was pretty much the average on most of these. I broke it down into 4 different groups. You have the Golden Age, which is 1938 to 1956. The Silver Age, which is 1956 to 1970. Then you've got the Bronze Age from 1970 to 1984. And then there was a lot of kind of mishmash and decisions of what the next age should be after the Bronze Age. And some people say it's the Copper Age or Modern Age, and that'd be 1984 to the present. And basically, when you start with the Golden Age, you're talking about characters that were made around World War II in 1956 to 1970. With the Silver Age, you have more of your, more like, I would say, kind of like the Kennedy era around that time. It's a little earlier than that.
Right. Eisenhower.
Yeah, Eisenhower, sure.
Yeah.
During the Bronze Age, the 1970s, so you've got, what are we talking? Nixon. Nixon era stuff. Nixon, Gerald Ford, Carter.
Watergate era.
Civil rights.
The Watergate era, sure.
Yeah. No, it's a good name, Clifton, actually. That kind of sums it up nicely in a weird way, that era. Like,
civil rights era, too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sure. And then the Copper Age to the Modern Age, that's a lot. I know it's a lot more time, but it's one of those things where there's been, I saw the Modern Age, I saw the Copper Age, I saw, the Steel Age. There's a bunch of different, no one can really decide on just what exactly they meant, but this is what we're going for. And the other thing to keep in mind is this is not a comprehensive list. It's mostly Marvel and DC. I would say it's probably all Marvel and DC, but it's one of those things where in some cases we chose to put characters that didn't debut at DC, like say Captain Marvel or Ted Kord Blue Beetle. Some cases we put them, not with original companies, but where they sort of debuted. But it's different. As we go over, we'll talk more about it.
Right. Exactly. So comic scholars do disagree a little bit on sort of like on the breakup here and there. The one thing that I think that they all agree on completely is that Golden Age starts in 1938, and that's at Action Comics #1. Right.
Yes.
Basically, the concept there is that Superman's the first superhero, right?
Mm-hmm.
Traditional superhero as we know it, and that kind of kicks off like comics going in the superhero direction that they went in, with a couple of exceptions here and there throughout the history, but we can get into that as well. Right. So I'm correct in saying that it's Action Comics #1 is the kickoff of the Golden Age.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that they can all agree on. After that, it's pretty much up for grabs.
Right. So my sense of it, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong about this, like my sense is that this, it's fascinating to me looking at these ages to kind of see like what trends in creativity sort of were, I would say in vogue during that time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think the cool thing to me is that like comics are always a reflection of the time that they're published in. Right. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
So what's cool to me is that I think the creativity and sort of like the creative decisions that some of the creators were making are impacted by, contemporary events, trends, the market, what was selling, what was not selling, and things of that nature, right? And so I think what happens is that like later on, comic fans and scholars look back at this time and kind of say like, okay, like this collection of books in this age range, like kind of have all this same commonality. So we're saying that this is that age, right? Does that make sense?
Mm. Sure.
Okay. For example, right? Like the Silver Age tends to be associated with like fantastical science fiction.
Right.
Right. That tends to be a commonality among many of the books in that era. Not the only commonality, but like that's one of the things that people think about when they think Silver Age.
Sure, because you had a lot. I mean, you had a lot of stuff like with the flashbacks in DC, or a lot of those books at the time. In order to help teach kids, sciencey stuff, they would have some kind of far out superhero idea or concept, and then it would be like a flashback to the Flash, or Green Lantern would occasionally explain what the speed of light was or something like that. Just to make it so that they could point to if Congress came looking by or whatever, or Wortham or whoever that was trying to say the comics were bad and leading to delinquency, they could say, no, there's actual scientific fact in these books.
Right.
And the Marvel heroes themselves at that time often had a atomic age origin.
Mm-hmm.
The cosmic rays and the space race with the Fantastic Four at the time, Hulk being atomic weapons,
and
Spider-Man radioactive spiders. So they were tied to what they were thinking about at the time in the atomic age.
Right.
All right. So should we get into some of the characters that debuted in the Golden Age?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's get into that. Okay. So the Golden Age, what's kind of the crux for this one? It's just sort of like the dawn of heroes, the dawn of the superhero.
I mean, a lot of the time, you get that they get tagged with the idea of being mystery men and women. It was a lot of like comics and a gimmick. Not everybody had fantastic superpowers. It was a lot of times it was just, they had one thing they did well, or they were, a lot of, it was a lot of transition from the idea of having characters that were like cowboys or cops or private investigators that now suddenly were wearing a mask for some reason.
Right. An extension of the pulps a little bit too, I guess, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those things where, once I think it was a lot of it was once Superman was out, it was definitely chasing that next thing that was going to be the moneymaker.
Right.
So the idea was just like a wild burst of ideas that basically would hopefully stick.
Okay, so like for example, so we got Superman, and who else in that period? 1938 to what'd you say, 47?
To 56.
56. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a different list. See, there's a lot of lists for this.
Right, there is.
Yeah.
So you're talking like you got Superman as your first, and then Batman, Wonder Woman, Alan Scott Green Lantern, Jay Garrick Flash, Al Pratt as the Atom, Mr. Terrific, Terry Sloan, the Spectre, Hawkgirl, Hawkman. Who else? Sandman, Wesley Dodds. And this is just DC, right?
Yeah.
Wildcat, Ted Grant, Wonder Woman, Zatara. Like a lot of the mainstays, or a lot of the characters that would eventually become, you at least know the name, and then you're not really sure who's underneath the mask. Decades later.
Right. Yeah. Robin, Starman.
Sure.
Yeah. Vigilante. So a lot of a lot of these characters are still around. A lot of them kind of become known, what is later known as like the Justice Society, right? Like what we know them as.
Right.
Yeah. But there's some big ones at Marvel too, or were they timely at this point? They weren't Marvel just yet, right?
No, they were timely at this point.
Okay.
So there you had like Submariner, Namor. You had the Human Torch. What was the android? Jim Hammond. Captain America.
Right. Yeah, he's the big one.
Bucky, Namora, Venus, the Wizard, the Destroyer, Citizen V, Blonde Phantom. I mean, a lot of these aren't quite as known as well as the DC ones, but they still, you can't argue that Namor and Captain America are the two big ones that probably jump out at everybody. Bucky too now with Winter Soldier. But
yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that's a character that's been around since almost the beginning.
It's interesting to me that DC kept a lot of their Golden Age characters more active, and Marvel let a lot of theirs kind of lapse into obscurity, with a few exceptions. And then the ones they kept, Submariner and Captain America, they kept tied to that time period. Like both of them still have the history of their World War II stories, and like they kept them firmly planted there, and then just let some of the others fade away to obscurity instead of making new versions of those characters later, like DC often did.
Right. I mean, you had people like, Roy Thomas, who came along and would basically, had a love for those Golden Age characters and their place in that time, in that time frame of being around World War II.
Right.
And would do work at both Marvel and DC, with like various titles like Invaders or All-Star Squadron. And they would basically retcon and give you backstory, or give you, the idea of, these characters were around together, but we didn't really have them see them team up in their original Golden Age stories. But now he's like, it's basically, it was his playground. He played with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Jeff Parker did the same thing with Agents of Atlas,
right?
When he brought in like Venus and Namora and was it Gorilla Man?
Yep.
He put it in Marvel Boy, the original Marvel Boy, not the not Novar, the one from not the Morrison one, but the original one that was from Venus. Not from Venus, was from Uranus. It's hard to keep track. But all those characters, but Jeff Parker played with a bunch of those too. I'm trying to think of somebody else who did stuff. Like Robert Kirkman did a Destroyer miniseries at one point. So every now and then someone, but then you have characters like Union Jack or Spitfire that were were put into that time, but I don't really know if Marvel had anything to do with them. I think they were just 70s creations.
Right.
Okay.
They were created for those books. And Union Jack is currently in a Paul Grist book that's all about British heroes.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, it's out. I think it's got like 2 issues out so far. But it's all British heroes written by him. And then the only one that I know of that might be the only non-original hero for that book is Union Jack. So
this is the superhero, like the dawn of the superhero that, them trying to, like you were saying, like kind of chase the success of Superman, and we're just throwing, coming up with a whole bunch of other ideas and seeing hopefully that something comes along and is going to be as successful as Superman was.
Right. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
And then you had basically, like I said, it's and in so many cases, it's obviously a lot of those characters have still, I think the only 3 that were published all the way through, when you had the era after the Golden Age, where it's kind of this, it's Westerns and it's romance comics and it's, it's crime comics and horror and big monster comics.
So really quick. So I'm going to interrupt you. So that's why I said 47, because I saw another list that takes that age as a separate age. Right.
Right.
So like that looks at, the point where superheroes stopped selling as well in like 47. Right. Yeah. And they started getting Western crime comics, romance comics, monster comics and stuff like that. And they looked at that as sort of like a separate era that they called the Atomic Age, incidentally, not to be confusing, but that
right.
Yeah.
But what the only thing I'd say is that Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman were still produced, as far as I know.
Right. Yeah.
So those are the only 3 that still continued on into the next age. So in some, there's but the main thing is a lot of these characters are still active, but obviously not those original characters, but still sort of are those characters.
Right.
I guess. So at one point we were saying is at the beginning was mostly a run for mostly to copy Superman, but as the wartime effort progressed, it became wartime comics up until the late 40s. And then it progressed, or at least the story started to diversify into like Western, a little bit more detective. Other characters were created as a result of different stories that etched away from, Superman, right?
Yeah, because that's the era that you have a lot of, you have a lot of Batman, space cop stuff.
Yeah.
So Batman evolves from being like, a dark vigilante in the 30s, carrying a gun, to being, Batman space cop, and I'm going to be, we're going to be going to Dimension X and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of tried to fit in with what else was going on in comics, but it wasn't quite the same.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. So it segues into the Silver Age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what something that's worth mentioning too is the code,
the comics code.
Yeah, that developed during this time too, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just something that, due to the immense popularity and juvenile delinquency,
Right.
they felt the need to have certain standards set in there, some stuff not mentioned,
Right.
which was interesting in itself.
Well,
but no,
okay.
go ahead.
So let's take a sidebar to that really quick then. So, okay. So who wants to cover the Frederick Wertham seduction of the innocent?
Seduction of the innocent?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can real quick.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So there was this guy, Frederick Wertham, who was a psychologist who said that he found a lot to be, a lot of the comic books basically in general were leading to juvenile delinquency, which was basically, a buzzword at the time of what, people were doing or kids were doing. If your kid was, you got your kid smoking and swigging, alcohol, then something contributed to it, then it was comics and then rock and roll and then video games and you pick it, they'll pick something. But comic books at one point were that thing because they were selling too well. It was, some people say the code was done because of what's his name, Gaines, who did Mad Magazine. Mad Magazine was selling regular like Marvel, like Timely or DC stuff, so that was another reason why the code was developed. But basically, it was they had this comics code that basically there was these things. Oh, that was the other reason why it was horror comics were doing really, really well. But they also had
that's what I had heard too. That I've heard some people argue that the comics code was a way of trying to put EC out of business.
Right. Yeah. That was the thing. Was also they were trying to put EC. The horror company had basically sprung up in because they were saying the covers were too graphic. You couldn't, the imagery was too much for kids, and depends on your kid.
Yeah.
But basically, it's one of the things where they would, they basically came up with a list of things or things you couldn't do in comics from that point on, and a lot of it was designed to curtail all the horror stuff, so that kind of stuff went away.
Yeah.
But it was just an idea of let's get rid of let's get rid of like the violence and the, I don't know if it was so much sexuality at that point, but Wertham thought Wertham brought like attention to the idea. He thought it was odd for like Batman and Robin to live alone in a big house with one other old dude.
Right.
Which was Alfred,
Yeah.
he was trying to find, but anyway, that was why the code was established. So the code became a thing.
Yeah. And that's famously what led into like the creation of Batwoman, the Katie Kane,
right. Or,
original, Catherine Kane Batwoman version from the Golden Age
right.
and the Betty Kane Batgirl and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. They were around. So it wouldn't just be, an older man with a younger ward and Alfred.
Right.
And then that was the other thing was like the Aunt Harriet that we get from the 66 show came about then as well. So they had, at least a female presence in the house.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. And those guidelines kind of stick with comics for a while, for many, many, many years,
mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's our sidebar on the seduction of the innocent Frederick Wertham,
right.
Comics contributing to juvenile delinquency. But yeah, okay, but through the Golden Age, Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman, they all stay in publication throughout, right? And the idea is that like the waning sales of superheroes combined with the comics code, right, kind of claims essentially like all of the other superheroes of the time, and then we get into Western comics and horror comics and etc. Right, and then superhero sees a resurgence. Right.
Yes.
In what's called the Silver Age. So take us through that.
All right. So the Silver Age basically is, I would say Stan Lee would argue it's the mighty Marvel age of comics.
Mm-hmm.
Beginning around 60, 61. But the Silver Age itself was 1956 and 1970, and some people argue that Silver Age is the first appearance of Barry Allen in Showcase 104, I believe. And then some people say, well, no, it's a little earlier because of the Martian Manhunter's first appearance, which is in Detective Comics like a year earlier or 9 months or 8 months earlier. So depending on who you go with and who you decide, that's where the Silver Age starts, right? Some people say it's primarily with the stuff that Julius Schwartz did by bringing back a lot of titles that were in the Golden Age or a lot of characters, and then giving them, like Clifton was saying, giving them more of an atomic age or a more modern spin, but keeping the names the same. So you had like Hal Jordan, Green Lantern first appearance, and Barry Allen's first appearance is the Flash, and then Ray Palmer is the Atom.
Right.
You still have, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, but these are the characters that are there and then you have on Marvel side, you have a much bigger presence because Fantastic Four #1 comes out, that's, obviously Reed and Johnny and Sue and Ben. And then, you have, then it's just an onslaught between him and Kirby and Ditko of creation where you have, Hulk and Thor, Spider-Man, Daredevil, Black Panther, later on, Doctor Strange, Wasp, Ant-Man, the X-Men. And then that expands even further to all the rest of the characters that come out around that time.
The original 5 X-Men. We should clarify. Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Iceman, Angel, Magneto, Professor X, Brotherhood, right? Yep. Those kind of characters. Yeah. So I mean, it's a big creative boom at Marvel. Like throw a rock, name your favorite Marvel character. Chances are, their first appearance is during this period.
Yeah, well, even that's the other thing is like something like even the character like as disparate as like Groot. Groot first appears as a completely different idea.
Yeah,
but as like a tree, a tree being. He didn't have the I am Groot bit at that time, but he was. It's one of the things where during the monster comic era, Groot was a thing. So they kind of extended that to the point where we are now with Groot, where he's part of the Guardians of the Galaxy. But yeah, it comes about. He even comes about in this point.
Yeah, and so, but back at DC really quick. So we're some people that cite the creation of Barry Allen as the start of the Silver Age. This is an interesting point too, because this will lead into ultimately, right, DC going back to the Golden Age characters and still saying, no, these characters exist and they're still here. Right. So this opens the idea of legacy that we talk about a lot of times, on the show as a mainstay of one of the things we love about the DC universe. This doesn't, it doesn't start right away with the creation of Barry Allen, but it's, we get to the Flash of Two Worlds comic, which is in this period, in the Silver Age period. Yeah. And that's sort of the beginning of, okay, there was a Flash before. Right.
Yeah, very much so. It's played the idea that Barry Allen read Jay Garrick Flash comics as a kid, and then it becomes a thing where you get the idea of the separate worlds, and they're separated by unique vibrations, and the Flash is able to go between one or the other. And they start looking back at all those characters and start to bring them back.
Yeah.
And that issue in specifically was Flash 123 in 1961.
Yeah. But you also have the thing of you had guys from both sides of both companies, they would socialize, or they would like play golf together. And I remember reading the story about the success that Marvel had with Fantastic Four. And then there was a question of, well, why don't we put all of the DC heroes together? And that's where you first get the Justice League together in the Silver Age. And that's, Superman,
I thought it was the other way.
What's the other way?
I thought it was the other way. I thought that it was the Marvel people had heard, like, we did this Justice League book and it's doing really well. And so that was the grain of the idea to like, oh, well, we need a team book. And then they created Fantastic Four that way. And then they also kind of, because they're not in costume until like issue 3. And so the idea I thought was for Thing was that if it didn't fail, it was also still kind of a monster comic. It was still kind of what they were doing all along at that point anyway, where Marvel was doing, mostly monster books at that point.
I thought it was the other way. I could be wrong. I thought it was basically Justice League was being put together as a response. I could be wrong. I don't know. Because at that point, because you have all those characters like Barry Allen and Hal Jordan appear and showcase before, and then the idea became, well, we ought to put them together in a team. But
here we go. Okay.
All right. I have it backwards then.
Tommy was just looking it up for us. Okay, so Tommy, you have Justice League March 1960, Fantastic Four November 1961.
Yeah, according to I did a quick Google search just to verify which was which. That way, we can see which came first, the chicken or the egg.
Gotcha.
Right.
Well, I have that backwards.
Okay, so what else? I mean, is there any other commonality that is prevalent throughout the Silver Age beyond atomic science and that sort of stuff?
Well, I think we talked about the idea before that a lot of the characters had grown up quote unquote jobs. A lot of the DC characters did.
Right.
That Barry was a forensic scientist, or and then Hal was a pilot. Carter Hall curated a museum. Ray Palmer was a scientist.
on top of that, I think it was the push for more social issues. I mean, it felt darker in a sense. You dealt with racism, just a more honest take on certain issues as opposed to avoiding them altogether.
Right.
More relevant stories based upon things that may have turned up in the news, pushing those characters in the midst of certain things. That's what I saw it as. I mean, you had a lot more politics come into it, a lot more, again, social issues being brought to the forefront in which those characters have to deal with those issues. I mean, the one I remember most vividly is that Green Lantern, Green Arrow issue. I think Green Lantern, Green Arrow number 85, in which you have Speedy shooting up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, things like that just turned up during that age, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, you have again, it's one of those things where Marvel definitely dealt with a lot of social issues too. They had the same thing when they were tackling. They had a couple, getting back to the code. There's a couple issues where they decided to run it without the code because they were showing Harry Osborn's drug use, and they couldn't get a code approved, but they ran it anyways. At the time because they thought it was an important story, so they did it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is the fun thing for the Silver Age to me is almost like there's almost two different Silver Ages in my head, right? That happen kind of simultaneously because I think Marvel and DC both did their own thing, but they which was completely different, but they both did some really awesome stuff in there, right? And so when I think of Silver Age, I think Dinosaur Island, right? That kind of stuff, right? Just these fun, like all the Jimmy Olsen like transformation books and stuff like that, and the wacky, like Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, right? And like just all of that stuff, right? Just whatever you got, like throw it into the pot. We're gonna do some fun fantasy issues. But at Marvel's side of things, like this is where to me the superhero starts to change a little bit, right? And it starts with Thing, and then you get to Hulk, and then Spider-Man, and it's the idea that there's a negative that comes along with being a superhero. With Frank, like what you were saying, like DC, like all of those guys sound like they have awesome jobs and they look like models the way that they're drawn, right? They're all kind of perfect.
Right.
And then Marvel during the Silver Age kind of introduces an idea that there's a flaw that comes along with having these powers, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, that's to me, I think like comics would grow up even more throughout the different ages. But yeah, I think the Silver Age is sort of like the first moment where they start to grow up a little bit, right? Is that just me? I don't know. I mean, maybe you guys disagree with that, I think, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think so.
No, it felt that way, at least towards the tail end of it.
Mm.
I mean, that's definitely the thing where, a lot of those Marvel books, they that was the thing at the time, was that Marvel books were completely unlike DC books, because DC books didn't really feel real, or they didn't feel like they were something that you could relate to, because again, they were kind of removed, or they weren't as grown up or as adult, quote unquote.
Right.
They were still kind of kiddie in a lot of their approaches to things. And it isn't until the early 70s or late 60s, early 70s when they start to get into more social issues, with like the Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams run, like Tommy was saying on Green Arrow, Green Lantern.
Right. Okay, so let's get into that though. So that kicks off then the Bronze Age, right? Which is, what did we say, 1970?
Oh yeah. Oh wow, I was off by a year.
Right.
Yeah.
1970, 1984.
Okay. So I think the Silver Age kind of starts it off, and then the Bronze Age kind of runs with that idea, like you said, like what Tommy said, like they Speedy, Green Arrow's longtime sidekick, is a heroin addict during this era, right?
Right.
And so we're getting a lot more social issues that start to be talked about. This is kind of, I think you could argue this is kind of the era of the anti-hero starts to begin, right? You get like the Punisher, Wolverine.
Yeah, Demon in the Bottle with Iron Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you get collaborations, team up books,
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. That's another thing that brought up to my attention, was you get a lot of like other heroes, single heroes with another hero, and they'll do team ups and things of that nature, and revivals. Like you saw a new type of X-Men that was different when they debuted it. Same with the Teen Titans,
Right.
you know, that popped up too, and then also what the most glaring thing to me was the way comic books were drawn started looking differently. You know,
Right. Okay.
they're like the art style started changing from what we used to see it as.
Okay. Who are some of the characters that came out? Let's go with that first, and then we can kind of get into some of the superstar creators of this era too.
Okay.
Which you're right. I mean, I tend to not think about it as art evolving, but you're right. I mean, yeah, like I'm thinking of Kirby's style in the '60s, and then I'm thinking like, yeah, Bronze Age. It's like it's Neil Adams. It's Marshall Rogers. It's right. Yeah.
But no, what you're saying earlier with cyaracters, you see more minority representation in the '70s than ever before.
Right.
I mean, we get Cyborg, what else?
John Stewart, Green Lantern.
Yeah, Monica Rambeau even makes an appearance during that age too.
Luke Cage.
Luke Cage.
Blade.
Yeah, Storm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of X-Men. A lot of X-Men.
Yeah.
This is kind of a renaissance period for X-Men.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. They had been running reprints. They were selling so low, they weren't making new issues for a while.
Right.
Just put out reprints of about, I don't know how many issues it was, like 20 or 30 issues, and we're expecting to cancel it.
Yeah.
And then Uncanny X-Men hit, and the rest is history.
Isn't that crazy to think about that? Yeah, like X-Men was on the verge of getting canceled with the original 5.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And a couple editions, like Havoc and Polaris had been there by the end too. So they had a few more editions, but not many.
Right. Again, those issues are drawn by Neil Adams. So a lot of them.
And then you have Giant Size X-Men #1, where we see the first appearance of Colossus and Nightcrawler and Storm and Thunderbird and Sunfire. Is Sunfire in there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not Wolverine. He first appears in Incredible Hulk, but he was brought over.
Right. They repurposed him there and started his meteoric rise to anti-hero.
Yeah. I remember hearing that Len Wein created the character with sort of like that in mind a little bit. That, like, you know, if you wanted to pop him up in other books, go ahead. You know, he was sort of, you know, he was sort of planned to be like, you can kind of add layers to him wherever he would land. Right. And then the other interesting thing was that, like, so they had been hearing that X-Men, while not doing well in the States and was on the verge of cancellation, was starting to do well in other countries. Right. And that's what got the editors to kind of go like, well, maybe we should sort of like revive the X-Men and let's start creating characters that maybe are from the country where the book is doing well. And maybe that'll entice like more readers in those areas to come in. Right. And what Len Wein says is that what was funny about it is like they never told them like what countries the book was doing well in.
So you had to guess.
So there was like, okay, Colossus, like he's from Russia, right? And Storm's from Egypt, and Nightcrawler's German, and you know, so it was a combination of that, and plus, who's the I'm blanking on the name, Dave Cockrum, right? He just liked designing characters, and he had a book of just cool visuals and cool characters that he had created that didn't have a home yet. And they said that they just went through that book and they were like, oh, this metal guy, cool, let's use that, right? And this like this demon looking dude with a tail, let's use him. And that's how like the germ of Giant Size X-Men came to be.
Right. Well, the thing about it is that a lot of those characters that Dave Cockrum designed were supposed to be Legionnaires for the Legion of Superheroes because he was working on that book before.
That I did not know. Okay.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
So some of those were like some of those characters, like Nightcrawler was one. I don't think Storm was, but I know Nightcrawler for sure was at one point was going to be because it was Mike Grell was doing Legion, I think, around the same time as Dave Cockrum, and Dave Cockrum just built, like you said, just like design characters. And Nightcrawler was one I've seen that mentioned in like Legion books or books from around that time where like it was proposed and for some reason it just didn't happen, and then he ended up taking those characters, and then they became Nightcrawler became Nightcrawler at Marvel. So
I did not know that part. Len Wein left that part out in the interview I was listening to.
Very good.
Yeah.
That's probably why Timberwolf looks so much like Wolverine, huh?
Could be.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is like when we think about the Legion and the X-Men, the Imperial Guard is supposed to be the Legion of superheroes.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Gladiator, Superboy. Yeah, Oracle is Saturn Girl.
Okay.
They're pretty much archetypes for the Legion of superheroes.
Yeah, isn't there a shape changer on? Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So
I did not know that. It makes perfect sense though. Now that you're saying it, now
Right.
I can't unsee it. I'm like,
I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember all the names of them, but there's like a giant size one that's supposed to be Colossal Boy. There's, like you said, there's a shape changer, Tommy.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than like Benny and was it Benny and Cecil, like the ones that the robot within the robot, like those, pretty much all of them are supposed to have analogs in the Legion of Superheroes DC.
Okay. All right. So let's get into the modern era or whatever it's called, Copper Age.
Before, I was going to add one thing too.
Okay.
That as far as the characters are going into, for the Bronze Age, we get the emergence of non-superhero characters in a larger sense,
Okay.
like Ghost Rider.
Sure.
But, yeah, that's, and then we get like what G.I. Joe, Transformers, like stuff that Marvel and DC start publishing outside of the traditional capes and superheroes, which was interesting to me that popped up.
Like the Star Wars license.
Yeah,
the Star Wars come up at this point, right? Yeah.
Well, I think the biggest one, I think we talked about it before, is Rom Space Knight.
Yeah,
which is
Boston
just
Space Knight.
It's just one toy, but I mean, he touches so many parts. You know, there's like so many like touchstones to like various parts of the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
For being based on a toy, I think it was a Hasbro toy. But that was one. But the other thing that I wanted to mention was along with a lot of minorities was you get a lot of female heroes introduced then.
Yes.
I mean, there's Dazzler and Kitty Pryde. And most of them got like Dazzler had her own book, Spider-Woman, Jessica Drew Spider-Woman had her own book, Ms. Marvel, Carol Danvers, who now is Captain Marvel, had her own book. You know, you also had, along with like Iron Fist and Shang-Chi, they sort of tried to tap into like the karate craze at the time, or martial arts craze at the time. But like Tommy was saying, along with having Ghost Rider, you had like Son of Satan. There had a lot of horror type heroes like Morbius as well.
Yeah.
Then you had Conan the Barbarian or Savage Son of Conan came up during that time as well. Yeah.
No, it was a good period too. Right. I'm looking at the list that we have just, you know, for our notes, and like Rogue was it? Yeah. I love Rogue. Rogue is she's great.
Right.
Beta Ray Bill, Elektra. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Rocket Raccoon. Yeah, a lot of, you know, it's another really great great time for Marvel too. A lot of big characters,
right,
in this time. Yeah, Lobo over at DC, Ambush Bug.
Yes,
yeah.
New Gods. I mean, that's a notable thing. Kirby jumps to DC.
Sure.
During this period, right? We get Jason Todd, so we get a second Robin. Yeah.
Yeah.
More legacy.
But you got like you get Etrigan. You know, you get the Demon.
Yeah.
Swamp Thing was big. Talking about Len Wein.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Commandy. But also, like, you had again, more legacy stuff where you had the idea of, you know, you had the Huntress, which was Earth 2 Batman and Catwoman's daughter, Helena Wayne. First Power Girls in this time.
Yeah.
I included the Wonder Twins because yes, they started on the animated series, but they also appeared in comics in the basically the Super Friends comics for that time as well.
Right.
But again, there's more legacy stuff. You had Kirby also did a version of the Sandman. You know,
okay,
that began with Wesley Dodds back in the Golden Age. So there's a lot of that stuff too.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into the modern age, Copper Age, whatever people call it. Right. That's the funny thing is that you know this is one where like even the title, the name of it, like people don't agree on just yet. So we'll get into this. We'll name off some characters that popped up in this age, and then we'll start getting into like which age we think is the most important to comics based off of the characters that came from it.
Right.
Okay.
All right. So modern age. Who do we got in modern age?
Modern age would be like a DC had like John Constantine. Again, more legacy stuff where Wally West becomes a Flash. One that I forgot on the list would be Kyle Rayner, Green Lantern.
Right.
You know, Kyle's pretty important because of the fact that, you know, he is basically the only Green Lantern for a good length of time.
Right. So Wally notable because he grows up.
Yeah,
he's
absolutely.
not created here, right? Because Wally West is a character from the 50s, but Wally West as an adult hero, is in this era, right? And you could say the same thing for Dick Grayson for Nightwing, right? Nightwing comes in this time too,
right?
Yeah,
I know Ted Kord, Blue Beetle was something at Charlton before with Ditko when he was there, but this is where like we get Blue Beetle Ted Kord coming into like it's issue 3 or 4 Crisis on Infinite Earths. He shows up. We get Booster Gold out of this era. Same thing with we get a new Huntress, Helena Bertinelli, which is kind of like which pretty much is I think is the Huntress most people know now.
Yeah.
Even though they're starting to lean back into the idea of introducing us to a character that is Bruce and Selina's daughter.
Yeah. But the crazy part of the stuff, the majority of what you're mentioning, it just hit me now, was we get basically the rise of the anti-hero. Like, you see Wolverine coming into being a crowd favorite.
Mm-hmm.
You see the Punisher, even though it wasn't created during the era, he starts pushing up through the ranks.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. They find the voice for them. Yeah.
But no, I was gonna say that, and the other thing is this is right around the time of Dark Knight Returns, right around the time of Watchmen. So you're looking at like, all those Charlton characters that got repurposed into the Watchmen characters, Rorschach and Night Owl, Dr. Manhattan. But yeah, so like Steel comes like it's in the late 80s, early 90s. John Henry Irons. Blue Devil was another one that I thought was needed a mention. And then over at Marvel, you have Cable and Deadpool, Domino, Venom. Also in the same time frame, you have U.S. Agent and Bishop. Who else?
Gambit.
Yeah, Gambit's made the list. You have technically the third Ghost Rider, Danny Ketch,
right? Silver
Sable. Yeah, these are a lot. I mean, again, these are characters that are pretty popular still now.
Yeah,
that it's hard to believe that they're like 30-year-old characters at this point.
Yeah. No, and you brought up Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen too, which those are kind of pinnacle books also that are credited also with like really growing up comic books, right? Like in subject matter and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's in this period, and we're still feeling the inspiration of those books to this day. So yeah, so okay, so now that we covered all of the ages and kind of talked a bit about like what were some commonalities among all of them. So which one to you guys is, based off of the characters that came from that era, which one is the most important?
For me personally, I think it's the Silver Age.
Okay.
I think it's one of those, it's for Marvel especially, okay. It's where the quote unquote House of Ideas comes into play.
All right.
So much of what again, if you're talking just fandom and what people know as Marvel Comics, I mean, yes, I know people still read the Golden Age stuff for Marvel, but if you're looking at what pretty much, has cemented them for the last, 40, we look at 30, 40, almost 60 years at this point, it is the Fantastic Four, it's Spider-Man, it's, the Avengers, all that good stuff. And then I think what DC does really well in the Silver Age is just the idea of taking a lot of stuff that they had and putting a new spin on it. And that's where your legacy stuff first begins.
Right.
They really do take a good look at what worked, and trading off the idea of, well, people know there was a Flash, right? Or they know there was a Green Lantern, but we can polish that off and, create a new character and do something with it. Plus you get, Martian Manhunter's there in that era. Everyone knows how much I love that character.
Right.
But there's also, there's like a lot of cool ideas. I think we didn't really talk about so much of like Cave Carson or the Sea Devils or the Atomic Knights, or, that's where you also get the Creeper and Deadman. The original Suicide Squad starts there in that time frame.
Oh yeah. The Dinosaur Island Suicide Squad stuff. Yeah. Yeah, before they're convicts.
Yeah, let's fight big monsters as we're like an arm of the, we're part of the military kind of a thing.
Yeah. That may be something that a lot of listeners don't know, is that there was a version of Suicide Squad before the Task Force X, Amanda Waller convicts, on a suicide mission, concept.
Yeah, it was just normal people fighting monsters, and that happened to be, tied tangentially to like the army and stuff, or the Navy or whatever.
Yeah.
Tangent. I came across this. Which came first, the Freedom Force, Marvel's Freedom Force, or this incarnation of Suicide Squad?
The Freedom Force?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah,
Okay.
it weirded me out because I thought the whole thing with convicts being hired by the government was Suicide Squad Origins, and Marvel ripped it with Freedom Force. The Freedom Force precedes it, but 2 years.
Okay.
Okay.
And it's out of X-Men that they did it.
Gotcha.
No, I didn't know that.
Well, I mean, you could argue that, that it's kind of like the Dirty Dozen.
Yeah, that's what I would think too.
Oh, no, it's definitely Dirty Dozen-ish.
Yeah.
All right. So Frank, you say Silver Age.
I love the Silver Age. I love Silver Age generally. Most comic, like I love Silver Age Superman stuff. I love Crypto and the Bottle City of Kandor and 18 different kryptonites and
Right. Oh yeah. That's great.
I love all
red
that
and
stuff.
gold kryptonite. I love that stuff.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And then, but like I said, I think DC was also. I think Marvel put like the Silver Age on the map, and then DC sort of. I mean, again, don't get me wrong. Now that I made that colossal blunder earlier about getting the story backwards about the Justice League and Fantastic Four. It's one of the things where I think they really like at that point in particular, they both were playing off each other so well that you got a lot of like really good characters and really good stories off both sides.
Yeah.
So I would say, for me personally, I say the Silver Age is the best for the heroes that were involved.
All right. So what do you guys say? Tommy, Clifton, what do you guys say?
Oh, for me, it'd be the Bronze Age.
Okay.
You finally get a representation in comics unseen before. I mean, you have earlier Black Panther that came out earlier, well, at least in the beginning part of it. But I felt like when they introduced the Black Panther, it wasn't something that was cohesive, but just a standalone character. But in the 70s, or at least the Bronze Age, you see certain characters come up to the forefront more than ever before. You get more female leads, more, again, diversity. And on top of that, the stories are more grounded into something that you see them running into, as opposed to something fantastical like in the Silver Age. I mean, as great as those and magical and fantasy-filled those stories were, they were just that. Heavy sci-fi, heavy fantasy. Bronze Age, you see the start of grounding characters. Not making them able to push planets, so to speak, feeling heartbreak, seeing a loved one die, like when Gwen Stacy died in Spider-Man. Say what you will about the beginnings of Spider-Man, but that stuff when Gwen Stacy dies is gut-wrenching, It's relatable to this day as far as what happens during the Bronze Age,
Sure. Oh no, they still mine, as much as they want to mine his origin, they mine that stuff still.
Yeah.
All the Gwen Stacy stuff is definitely a milestone for that character and for Marvel Comics in general, because it's one of those things where when Marvel's the Kurt Busiek, Alex Ross book came out, that's where they were saying that's to a lot of people that's when the Silver Age is over, because that's kind of like when Marvel loses innocence is when Gwen dies, and there's that whole issue of Marvel's that's about about her, right? Like issue 3.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then another thing that popped up too, I didn't even think about, was you get a lot of books that are not comic book related in the same sense of what we were saying earlier. Even we get villain books like the Joker, or Secret Society supervillain stuff come up,
Right.
Yeah.
Supervillain team up at Marvel.
Yeah. You get the other side of the perspective. Yeah. And then of course it's the huge cash grab. TV infused into it in a bit, where you see other characters that are based upon what we see on TV and things of that nature. So I see it as what characters go, explosion of ideas of where they can push it even further than what they had before. There's certain stories that weren't being mined in earlier times that were just starting to take fruit now, or at least in this particular age.
Right.
You get a lot more diversity with how they're telling the stories. It was you can have a superhero that could not leave the streets or be on another plane altogether, but still grounded in a certain sense of what they are and what they can do,
Right.
So I say the Bronze Age for me.
No, some good arguments there for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of characters find their voice there for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Clifton, what's yours?
Just foundationally, I have to go with Frank and Silver Age.
Okay.
I think Golden Age, obviously is where, the building blocks first started, but like a lot of those characters were fading out after less than a decade, like didn't have much staying power. And Silver Age is still the foundation of so much of what we're seeing in comics as well as in movies and TV. Like Barry Allen's The Flash on TV, and the MCU is built on the early Avengers issues from the early 60s. I mean, Wanda and Vision, all that stuff, everything that we're still seeing is prominently is those characters.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just why I go with Silver Age there. I mean, Tommy's right. Like there's a lot of growth in what we view as the storytelling, I think, is from the Bronze Age, like what we see in the stories that we're seeing now, but just the foundation of them is still Silver Age.
Right. Yeah. I agree with you. I'm going to try and, because mine is Silver Age also, and I'm gonna just try and say what you were saying just a little differently. I think. I mean, it's kind of a cheat because I mean, yeah, like they all kind of build off of each other, like what the other ones did. Right. But Silver Age for me, you go back and you look at it, and yeah, it can feel a little hokey, and it can feel a little like gee whiz, and you know, like you're watching an episode of Leave It to Beaver, right? Mm-hmm. But what I argue though is I think that the Silver Age is the point, especially at Marvel, where we see the first moments of growth in these characters, right? Where like it is done in a kid palpable way, right? But just the fact that they're simply injecting flaws into these characters, right? You know, that you know, you have powers and it's not perfect, and it's not, things are not always going to go your way. I think is a really important development in comics that yeah, like Clifton, like you were saying, like we're still playing with that stuff, right? So yeah, I think Tommy, I think you're right. I think the Bronze Age completely, I think, takes that to another level. Absolutely. And I think the type of storytelling changes in the Bronze Age. Right. And you know, I would never say that reading a Bronze Age comic is like watching an episode of Leave It to Beaver. Right. You know what I mean? But yeah. I say Silver Age also.
Well, no, I get what you all are saying. It's 3-1 silver, but for me, I'm impeccably Bronze Age. It's just because Clifton was right as far as the template's concerned. But if I look at templates, each age beyond that precedes that as far as templates go. But the Silver Age to me was a reimagining of the template, in which they use certain characters from the past, and it's kind of what they're trying to do now with the modern age. Give a different take, diversify it a bit in order to get templated characters a new beginning. But as far as storytelling goes and the characters that evolve from that, I still believe the strongest characters that evolve from that age is what we're still seeing now. I would argue to say that the best molded characters came from that age. And if we're getting characters that we're getting now, they're infusing those old characters with the imagery that we got in the 70s or during the Bronze Age.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Barry feels more like Wally than he ever did, you know?
Very true.
Hal should be dead. It should have been, you know, there's certain, to me, that's what I see it as. And mind you, the nostalgia of the Silver, I almost went with the Silver Age. But to be honest, the strongest stories, the ones back with the characters go through the punch and the changes, as much as Batman, I think, is a strong character, that Bronze Age stuff is infused to him now more than the modern age. You know, Superman was never Superman than in the Bronze Age. Now, mind you, I love Golden Age Superman. I love Silver Age Superman. But as far as the heart, I say the Bronze Age. It was just the strong characterizations of who they were and why I liked the character came from the Bronze Age.
Well, I think you'd also argue the idea that the Bronze Age is where you get a lot of kids that were raised on Marvel start to write for Marvel or DC. Like you have a lot of guys that were you know, read all those Marvel books, saw what, you know, Stan and Jack and Steve Ditko were doing, and decided, well, this is how much, you know, if they were doing this, well, this is what we can do by taking it the next step further, right? That's why you get like Jim Starlin coming on doing Adam Warlock, or like I talked about Roy Thomas earlier, or
Kurt Busiek.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, all these guys that are raised on that stuff and then applying much more of a, like you said, Denny O'Neil with, Denny O'Neil's arguably, we talk about Green Arrow and Green Lantern, but there's also Denny O'Neil's, wouldn't you say, Zach, the one that helps bring Batman back to more of his roots?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I 100% agree with Tommy there. I think, I think as far as Batman, what he is now, yeah, I think people will say Dark Knight, right? Dark Knight Returns, but it's the Bronze Age. It's that 70s stuff.
Yeah. But okay, I see your influence there, Frank. And I say the most prolific time in comics came from the modern age, in which people saw was through the Bronze Age.
But you're about to make my point for me, Tommy. The idea is the fact that if the Silver Age at Marvel had never happened, you don't start to look at characters. You can't get, like, you have to get where the seeds were planted, right? And that if you don't take if Stan and Jack and Steve Ditko and the guys there at the bullpen didn't start taking a more realistic look at not everything's, it's not everything's like an episode of Leave It to Beaver. Not everything's like the kids in Riverdale. Not everybody gets along. Just because you're wearing a superhero costume, we're not all chums and buddies, and people are people. Just because they have superpowers doesn't mean they're not people. And that starts with the Silver Age of Marvel.
But you're right, it starts there. But the biggest explosion happens in the age after. So
if you're saying that, right, that's why I say that those kids that were, again, those kids, and I say kids, it's funny to refer to guys that are way older than any of us that made those stories. When I say that when those kids came in, and when you basically see like the clean cut guys in the 60s, where it's like Stan and Jack and Steve, and at that point Steve Ditko's gone. But if you look at like old bullpen photos of, say, like Chris Claremont or like Jim Shooter, or any of those guys, they're all like the long haired guys from the 70s, like Len Wein. Who's another one? Like I guess Starlet at that point.
Gil Kane.
But Kane is 60s or 70s.
Gil Kane's more 60s, and he was more DC than he was. I mean, he did Marvel too, because he did Spider-Man. But he did. I mean, when I think Gil Kane, I always think of like the Atom, or Hal. Like he did a lot of Green Lantern stuff.
Give me a year, so to speak. It just makes me understand it better, because to be honest, I'm new to the aging and where the time frame goes. I know it's sketchy with certain people, but if you're talking about, to me, because when you say silver, to me, I get 60s. And maybe a scotch or a little.
I mean, if we're looking at the list that I put together, we're looking at Silver Age is up to about 1970.
Yeah.
About, give or take. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, you're talking, this is like, this is the heyday of like Stan still writing a bunch of books. Yeah. Kirby's still with him on Fantastic Four. Ditko's probably gone at this point. But, it's those early, all the mainstay books, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is when you who was it that was working for Marvel when they were like 15 or something like that? Was that Starlin? Was that Starlin or Shooter? I can't remember. Shooter
worked for DC. He wrote Legion of Superhero stories when he was 13.
Yeah, that's nuts, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's absolutely nuts.
Yeah. All right.
I was just gonna bring up, I have a quibble about just ages in general.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure.
Whereas there's no way we're still in one age since 1984. I know that's what lots of people say, so that's not on anyone here. That's just a common thing you will see out there, but there is no way that is possible. Because every other age is roughly 15 years.
Yeah.
And now we're supposedly, this one's 30 plus at this point. And I think part of it has to do with people not wanting to admit they're getting old. And people not wanting to admit they've lived through multiple comic ages at this point, but there's just so much difference. Like, personally, I would say an age changed around 2000.
Yeah.
And then probably again around 2015, just personally in my own opinion. And I have some things that would indicate it for me, but that's just my personal thinking.
No, I agree with you 100%.
Yep, I do
too.
To
me, I think the emergence of Image creates a whole nother age. That's just me.
Right.
There was one list that I saw. So this is the same one that I talked about that says the Golden Age ended in 47. And then you have the Atomic Age, which is your Western romance sci-fi boom from 48 to 55, right? So I'm going off of this list really quick. Then they say Silver Age is 56 to 69. Bronze Age is 70 to 84. And then this is where it gets different, right? They say Dark or Copper Age is 85 to 91.
Okay.
Then they call an Extreme Age, which is 92 to 98, right? And then 98 to 2016, they call the movie age.
Right.
Ooh.
I would call it the graphic novel age myself.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But see, the thing is, I would think that for me, I would think you need a Vertigo age in there somewhere too.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of, Swamp Thing leads into Vertigo. And then you have all these, like we talked about before in another episode, the idea that, Neil Gaiman's Sandman is so heavily rooted in DC continuity and history up to a certain point, and then it sort of gets turned off, and then it becomes more, literature based, or, in some cases opera based, or, higher art, quote unquote, based.
Right. All right. Okay, so to close out, so which one of the heroes from the age we selected do we think is the most important of that era? But first, if you like the show, be sure to check out all of our past episodes on YouTube and letmeknowhowitis.com. Just please, however you find us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Finally, if there's anything you would like us to discuss, please be sure to leave a topic suggestion on Twitter or in the comments. Our Twitter handle is our show's initials at LMKHII. All right. So, of the era you chose, who's the most important character from that age? I feel like three of us may select the same character.
Probably.
Probably.
Well, I go first since mine's the only one that matters.
Okay.
Due to public support, I will go with Storm.
Okay.
Representation matters. Not that they've done much with the character, but representation of a strong black woman is a great thing.
Yeah. No, and some of her best stories are from that era too.
Oh yeah.
I would say.
Oh yeah.
Some of her best moments.
Yes.
Storm is great. Okay. Frank Clifton. Who wants to say this guy first?
Should we do a 1, 2, 3 and say them at the same time?
Yes.
Yeah, should we? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, all right. Let me do a countdown.
Okay.
All
right. Count us down.
On 3.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3.
Spider-Man.
No, sorry. No, I'm just kidding. I said crypto. No, mine was Spider-Man as well.
Yep. Okay.
3 for Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think as well as, as the idea of, changing the game of, no, a teenage kid could be a superhero and it doesn't have to be a sidekick. It's important. And then also the idea of just that, just the amount of stuff that Peter Parker goes through in a day, but the release or the transformation that he makes going into Spider-Man is those Ditko Stan Lee stories still are magical for me to read even now. So
sure.
As a kid in the Bronze Age, as it were, or Modern Age, I guess it was somewhere on the cusp of Bronze to Modern Age when I was first getting into this stuff, it was Spider-Man that brought me into it. I talked about before, Spider-Man is Amazing Friends was my gateway to the whole comic world and superheroes. And so I have like a, nostalgic spot for that, but just as a character, I think it definitely, he changed the game of comics at that point in time. In the everyman being the hero, but still with everyman problems. And, and the stuff they face, like Gwen Stacy and stuff that we get to in the Bronze Age, just all of it was there, from the get-go with them.
Yeah. I would say too, also, this is nice. This is nice how this worked out that we didn't step on each other's toes with this. I would say too, that his supporting cast, I think, is in some ways, everybody in comics is kind of chasing Spider-Man as far as that goes and the importance that the supporting cast has. Right.
Yeah.
Because I mean, they are so part of what he goes through and not necessarily there to like get them out of a jam.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You know what I mean? And I think that's super important. And I think Spider-Man is, maybe the most important character in all of comics for that reason. I mean, him or Archie, I guess, really, you know what I mean?
No.
Right. Sure.
No, but Spider-Man can be anybody.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so important. And I agree with all what you guys said as far as his importance in comics. I mean, he transcends a lot of stuff without having to change or retro or just change the character at all, basically. He embodies everything, and what Zach was saying earlier, I've never seen a supporting cast more beloved.
Yeah.
Essentially, I mean, even the ones that pass and are barely in the story. I mean, you're wrong. The influence that Uncle Ben leaves is immeasurable.
Yeah.
You don't question his love interests, his trials and tribulations. I mean, every aspect of the character is indelibly beloved and embraced without question. I've never seen a character in its best iteration pure. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's not like they went back and gave him freeze breath or laser vision, you know, or made him fly, you know?
Yeah.
It's not like they changed his personality in order to keep up with the times.
Yeah, very true.
In fact, they're still chasing the original story just because it's that honest.
Yeah.
You know?
No, we said it in our teenage superhero episode too. I mean, it's like, you know, he's the archetype, right? For Spider-Gwen, Silk, Miss Marvel, right?
Miss
Miles,
yeah.
They're all Robin, Static.
Terry.
Yeah. I mean, they're all a play on Spider-Man, on the archetype that he created, or that was created with him, I should say. So yeah. No, good stuff. All right. Be sure to tell us your thoughts in the comments or on Twitter about Comic Ages and its heroes. As always, we'll post links and examples to everything we talk about on letmeknowhowitis.com. Please remember to like us and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.